Good evening. Now, for today's video, I would like to focus on the subject of property ownership and the watchmaking brand of Montandon-Blaiselion. Now, these group of brothers were extremely influential, and they appear to have been quite wealthy for their time. And indeed, we find them owning some of the most principal real estate objects in the Locle area. So I would like to read briefly what we do know, and one of the major sources we have on this property ownership is from Frederick J. Montandon's Le Montandon, which is a family history, a genealogy between the years 1310 and 1910, so 600 years of history. Now, Frederick Jules does record the following, that he is speaking about this, more or less, these are the second generation of these watchmakers. Their parents had originally begun in watchmaking. However, it really flourished under this generation, and we're speaking of these various different brothers. Now, among them we have James, Eulis, Charles Adolphe, and these are some of the principal brothers. But I would like to read what we have. Now, James Montandon, he was a clockmaker in Locle in Paris. Then in Saint-Limier in Switzerland, he became the vice mayor. Now, James Montandon and his brothers have owned a building in Locle called Vaillant, and they have owned this building since 1844. Along with the Sandos house, this is La Maison Sandos, which is to the west of the town, and the house known as Le Château des Frettes in the northern suburbs. The Montandon house, La Maison Montandon, is the only old residence still existing in the town. Now he goes on to speak about La Maison Montandon, and this is quite fascinating. This presents a distinctive architectural characteristic. Now, all three of these buildings, this is Vaillant, Maison Sandos, and Le Château de Frettes. All three of these were, moreover, built by the same architect. And the Montandon house is particularly notable inside for its sober and massive layout. The corridor and stairwell are of ample dimensions and adorned with beautiful wrought iron balustrades. It is this building mentioned by Monsieur T. Combe in Neuchâtel, a picturesque and reproduced in a colotype on the same page. Le Vaillant is today a street like any other, rising where one notices above all an 18th century house with a beautiful haughty facade and a very high stoop with a wrought iron balustrade. Now, the Montandon house owed its comfortable appearance to having accommodated illustrious guests. The Empress Josephine on September 27th, 1810, and the King of Prussia, Frederick Wilhelm IV, in 1842. Now, I have located this building in Locle, and indeed this was also reputed to have been the house where Hans Christian Andersen, the Danish poet and writer, and very famous for his tales, he lived there as well. And this is very interesting. Now, he does mention that we have in this information additionally that there is a footnote saying that this house was acquired from the Hourier of Paris. So these were Swiss watchmakers who went to Paris, Les Hourier, and they're very famous in watchmaking. And indeed, there's a nexus of these families. We see Hourier and Breguet, and they're all connected with this in the Courvoisier, and we have Montandon with this group of families. Now, they were definitely working together, as we know that Hourier and Leroy, this is Julien Leroy of Paris, the king's watchmaker, they were working together, and indeed Montandon Frères had a business relationship with Leroy of Paris also, and we find this in David Henry Montandon's business correspondence from the 1830s. So we do know that these business relationships existed, and indeed we can see with the fact that the Montandon family purchased this house of the Hourier in 1844. So this is all very interesting. Now, I would like to spend a little bit of time. Now, this Cré-Vaillant, this is current day addresses number 28. Now, this appears to have been changing in the past, and indeed, if you'll even look, some references on the Google Earth will give you Cré-Vaillant 123, which is very fascinating because we do know from Davoine Almanacs from the 1870s that Henry Montandon-Nardin was listed in Davoine at Cré-Vaillant number 123. And now this is interesting because at this time, now this building was owned by James Montandon and the brothers. However, Henri is a cousin of the Locle branch. Now, although the Montandon Frères business individuals are the Blaiselion, Montandon-Blaiselion du Locle genealogical branch. So it does appear that they were probably subletting or renting business space to him, as James would have already moved on to Saint-Imier, and where he was the vice mayor, and his son, by 1877, this exact same time, would already have moved to Colombier, where he was a banker. Both James became bankers in the cantonal bank of Locle, and they were extremely wealthy. So, but we will return to James, the son of James, also later. Let us now focus on the next object in this group of edifices, these architectural wonderful masterpieces. would like to say that the architect who is reputed to have built all three of these, this was a very interesting individual. And this is Lagrange, and he is noted for a series of big projects in around Switzerland. He was originally from Lausanne, but he is also reputed to have built the Chateau des Monts, which is the watch museum of Locle today. And this is an illustrious building, but we will discuss that in a minute. The second building that we have here, and this dates from 1770, and this was the Chateau des Frettes. And this is a historic building indeed. Now this appears to have been acquired through marriage alliances, as the wife of James, he married Emma Grosclad, and now we do know that there was a period in the history of this building where several different relatives, basically the owner of the building was in Dutch Guyana doing business, and more or less this came to the other relatives, And so it would have been through this Grossclad connection that James Montandon was exercising overseeing or owning. It does appear that he was the owner, as we do have a paragraph stating that the house did change hands through a series of relatives. So this appears to be at that period. So, but in this Chateau de Fret would eventually burn down in a fire in 1992. So that original building is no longer with us. We do have historical drawings and postcards, etc., and pictures. Now, the next building we have, which was called the Maison Sandoz. Now this, it's once again another building owned by James and his brothers. However, when we evaluate the connections here, it does appear that this was probably through Ulysse Montandon, one of the other brother of, he was actually the oldest amongst these brothers. And now we know that this Maison Sandoz, their connection is this Sandoz-Gendre family. And Ulysse Montandon married Séraphine Sandoz-Gendre. So his wife appears to be the connection here. Now, her father was Florian Sandoz-Gendre, and it does appear to have come through these individuals. Now, it is not clear. There are several different buildings called Maison Sandoz, and the more modern ones have nothing to do with the ancient edifice that we're speaking of here. And indeed, I have found several different images of this Maison Sandoz, or residences of the Sandoz family, and they are here. I will present them. However, it must be considered that these are most likely not the building. However, it is most likely that the building that we are speaking of here, as we know that the three buildings, it is mentioned that three buildings were built by the same architect, this illustrious builder. This is most likely a reference to the Château des Monts, which is the watch museum in Locle, which is very fascinating. And indeed, we do find a Marie Henriette Sandoz, who was married to a Dubois, Samuel Dubois. And Dubois was a huge watchmaker and businessman in Locle, and that business was extremely powerful, and they lasted for a long time in watch business. So it does appear that this Maison Sandoz is indeed Château des Monts. And this would have to have been at a particular time during the 19th century. It's not exactly clear at what point this ownership happened. However, the book that we're quoting this information is published in 1913, so this does give us an approximate window that this is most likely between the 1840s and 1900. So now that we have gone through these three buildings that have been constructed by the same architect. Now there is a farm which we hear of in a legal case between a Charles Adolphe Montandon and Charles Weber. And this was a place called Les Granges. And this appears to be in the southern part of Locle, right around the Col des Roches, which is a place where a tunnel was made, a pass through these mountains, basically opening up the French border with Switzerland. So it does appear that this is right around the area of Col des Roches. And this was, we know that Charles Adolphe, now this is Charles Adolphe Montandon, the head of Montandon-Furs, Locle. And we see that the individual that he obtained this from, this is again through a marriage. His wife, Louise, basically, this was a Favre-Bull, Louise Favre-Bull, and he was known as Adolphe Montandon-Favre. His alliance name was Favre, but this Favre-Bull, this was a Louis Favre-Bull, and he is also referred to as Louis Favre-Sandoz. And indeed, we do know that Montandon-Furs Locle were selling golden watches. This was the lowest quality watch that they had, second class it was called. The supreme class watches were signed Charles Adolphe Montandon. The first class watches were signed Montandon-Furs Locle, and the second class watches were signed Louis Favre Sandoz. So these watches that they were making under that name, they were originally made in Switzerland. However, during the 1870s, we find in the Mexican press articles stating that they had established a watch fabrication in Mexico, and they were selling these Mexican-made watches on the Mexican market, according to the article itself. So this is very interesting, a notice in the Mexican press. But so we have Charles Adolphe Montandon. We see him owning this farm at Lake Grange. And this wasn't a super illustrious, this would have been a fruit and vegetable and probably animal farm just outside of the city limits. And the whole dispute was about this. Charles Weber was supposed to be taking care of the estate. Incidentally, Charles Adolphe lost this case. He was not able to prove the deficiency in the contract. So, but it is interesting that we have this property connection here. Now, the next property that we know that these brothers owned, we find this on Rue de la Côte, and this is number 218. Now, this number would change as the streets were reorganized several times during the 19th century, but this was their main working shop, and probably the sales shop was there on the first floor. I was actually in Locle in this building. I was able to find this. There is a 1890 publication by the city of Locle, and the archivist, Caroline Calam, was very helpful in providing the coordination, and I was able to determine exactly which building this was. And this building still exists. It's been redone into apartments. However, this was the main building of the Montandon-Furs watch industry. And along this whole Rue de la Côte, we find this is the epicenter of Montandon watch fabrication in Locle. And we see along the whole street, we see where all of the relatives were working together with them on various different specializations in making these watches. And this is how we see this. We have several of these individuals rotating from time to time between the buildings, and now we are able to deduce that they were in collaboration with Montandon-Furs on their watch assembly. So this is very fascinating. So I will provide this street diagram, which I've done by myself, but we can see all the locations along this, and this is really the epicenter. Now, there is another location in Locle that I'd like to talk about next, and that is this Hotel de Ville number 3. And this was a building that is right next to the mayor's building, this Hotel de Ville. It was built right there between around the early 1880s, like something between 1882, 1884. And during this time, the building was totally constructed for a residence and a watch manufacturing for Charles Albert Montandon. Now, this is the son of Charles Adolphe, who would later take over after the death of his father. Now, apparently, after he only used this for, he may not have even been able to use this, but very little, because we do know that he was already in the process of liquidating the business, and he would relocate to the Caribbean and in the Antilles, as it were, would establish the largest cocoa plant in all of the Antilles with over 100,000 cocoa trees. So by 1886, this building was sold to George Favre-Jacot, who established the Zenith Company for watchmaking. So they purchased this, and this was revealed in an article. So there is this idea that Montandon Frères was in the process of transitioning from their old location to this new building, which was going to be much more modern, and they probably either only just finished it or used it very little, maybe 2 to 3 years maximum. And their presence there is not really recorded in Devon almanacs, but it is most likely that this was handed over practically new to this, the founder of Zenith, and they took it from there. But this is quite interesting. So this was Charles Albert Montandon, the son of Charles Adolphe. A bonus venue I would like to add in this collage is a property referred to as La Porretas. And this is a property that is located just over the border in Vaud, in the canton of Vaud, outside of Neuchâtel. And this was a cottage sitting on approximately 4,000 square meters of land. This was owned by Ulysse Montandon-Blaiselion, and Ulysse had left Paris in around 1849, before 1850, and we do find an article in the Swiss press where he is selling this cottage in the summer of 1858. So it appears to have had this for no more than a decade. But as we can see, this is a very large cottage, and it is up in the mountains, and very possibly had, it most probably had a view of the Lake Neuchâtel from these heights, as this is quite high up, or at least from close by, one could probably see the lake. This was a very interesting plot of land, and he probably went to this place from either Locle or Courcelles. Now, Montandon Frères did have a watch point in Neuchâtel City, outside of Neuchâtel City in Courcelles, and so he could have easily gotten to this place from either Courcelles or Locle. This is slightly southeast of the Traverse Valley. So I just wanted to add this exotic country house that we find Ulysse Montandon Blaiselion, the oldest brother, selling in the summer of 1858. There is, we spoke about James Montandon, who was the banker and one of the most wealthy, richest Crassus, as they say, of these brothers. Now, his son, all by the same name, James, moved to Neuchâtel City, or just outside it, at this Colombier. And we see that he is in Colombier, but it's not clear. In fact, I have a postcard with the Montandon family coat of arms. This is original. This is from the early 20th century. And this is from Frederick Montandon, who was a geologist in Geneva. And he wrote it to James, but James Montandon, his address is only mentioned à Colombier. Monsieur James Montandon à Colombier. That is it, Canton Neuchâtel. So we do not have his street address yet. This found its way to him, which is quite interesting. We do know, however, that we do find 2 articles in the Swiss press from the early 20th century, and it mentions that there are direct relatives of James, and I believe these are through Euless, actually, because James married the daughter of his uncle Euless, so he married his cousin, and after his death, they inherited this, and they were living there, and we have, and in one of these articles, we do have the address. This is Rue Haute, number 7. So now we have the exact location of this house, and this is huge. This is well, James was a banker. He was extremely wealthy. He was, I believe he was even wealthier than his father, but he became a really big whale. And these bankers, both these James, they were in this cantonal bank. They were loaning gold to watchmakers. This was an extremely lucrative business. Obviously, banking always is, but they were able to clearly make a lot of money, and we see this in the real estate. But this Rue Haute, number 7, this is another regal place. And now I would like to focus on one last piece of real estate, and this goes back to the very beginning of the Montandon family's history. Now, the Montandon family immigrated from the Burgundy area of France, and these are more or less remnants of the Holy Roman Empire at this point, this part of the country, these possessions. The border was moving back and forth all the time. France was expanding, but we find in the early 1300s, in 1303, we do have a Montandon establishing the colony of Locle, establishing the city. And this is where we have, this is where the family enters the country, more or less, from France. And they brought it with them because they were from the village of Montandon in France, which is fairly close by. So they came from Montandon, and they became known as Montandon. And we find several generations later, a little John, this is Petit Jean Montandon, he owned a farm in a place called Varode, and he was called Petit Jean Montandon dit Varode. And the farm is sketched in this Les Montandon book, and we have the sketch here. And this is, I have attempted to find this on Google Street Maps. I have been certain that it is highly possible. I did find one location that may be it. However, it is very nebulous to try to find this. Now, I know at the beginning of the 20th century, this building still existed. However, the chances are that this is probably already destroyed, because this would have been built in the early 1500s. This farm was basically, and he lived between 1469, I believe, and 1540, around in this area. But he died around 1540. So this would have had to have been built around 1500, somewhere in there, early 1500s. But this is the oldest piece of property, and it was passed through the family from generation to generation among different cousin branches, but it mainly stayed with the Blaiselions, which we're speaking. All of these individuals are in the Montandon-Blaiselion. Now, Little John established 4 branches. He had 5 sons who established 4 different branches of Montandon, and all of the Montandon branches come from this Petit Jean. So we have Blaiselion, Girard, Alamand, Varoda. So it's he is the common ancestor for all Montandons of Locle and La Brevine. So, but we have this, and this building only left the family in after 1890, because in 1890 the last owner was Louis Camille Montandon. Now he was a cousin of the brothers who established Montandon Frères, and he was living in Locle and working in Locle, and at some point he departed the watch business. However, he was a part of Montandon Frères also, and we find him mentioned because a very famous Swiss literary individual who married into the family wrote this, and his widow was explaining this was recorded. However, we do know that this last Montandon Frères owner, basically this property was sold on outside of the family after 1890. So it is quite interesting. But we do have, and apparently with regard to the original building that we were speaking, Vaillant, that stayed in the family with James up until what appears to be the early 20th century, because when Les Montandons was written in 1913, this building was still in the family. It was still in the family, however, they were not living in this building. It was probably subrented to various tenants. Like they would say that rentier, this person is collecting basically income streams as a result of having this property as a property owner. But I just wanted to focus on this incredible selection of properties. This is a little bit of a status, sort of owning these premium pieces of land and buildings. This is real civic status. And it shows the movers and shakers, and they were certainly in the upper echelons of local society at this time. They were building the watch industry in Switzerland. They utilized this system very well, this établissage, this fabrication of watches, sort of cottage industry. And this was a period in Swiss history where this was the norm. And they grew out of this, and this would eventually go to large mass production. However, we do have this very colorful history. I wanted to document this watchmaking company through the various iterations of these brothers and their children and the property that they owned, because this a little bit puts them on the map and puts a face on them. As when we see these buildings, we can see a little bit about the stories behind them. So I hope it was an interesting journey, and I would like to receive any feedback. And thank you for sticking through on this deep dive. It's a little bit off of total watch subject. However, I feel that when we're probing these histories, especially a whole watch brand, we want to be as full abreast of the information that we can, that we want to get to the bottom of this. We want to leave no stone unturned. And when we have this larger picture, the big data, and we can see how these individuals were working, living, and thriving, it's a fascinating story. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to your comments and questions. Take care. Bye-bye.